This question from Michael on Instagram. With Thomas Tuchel taking the England job, Julian Nagelsmann taking the Germany job, and other high-profile managers being linked with international vacancies, is international management becoming cool again, Lars?
So I think there's one thing that makes it extra attractive right now, which is the World Cup in the US. Like a World Cup in the US, Mexico and Canada, it's going to be a big deal. And I'm not saying it's a smaller deal if it's anywhere else. I guess I am saying that, but it's just the case. It's going to be a hugely, in terms of the marketing potential and everything. Also, it's just going to be kind of cool. Like the idea of America does have a certain draw to people. Like it's an incredible place. I was there earlier this year. Great cities. The idea of being part of a tournament that kind of helps further reignite the interest for football in that country. I think that's a pretty sexy and appealing idea to a lot of guys. I definitely think so. I'm not convinced Pochettino, for instance, would have taken the US men's national team job if there wasn't a home soil World Cup around the corner. I think that's definitely something that made that gig more appealing to him. I think that could actually be a factor here. There is also there are other, like Ancelotti has been linked with maybe doing the Brazil job for a while. I think for coaches of a certain age, I think transitioning into international management kind of makes sense. There's a smaller commitment in terms of days a year, and you can pursue interests outside of football, of which, of course, Ancelotti has always had many. Most of them come on a plate, but that's his thing. I think there are individual examples, but if you're looking for like systemic things that's going on right now that makes international football more attractive to big name managers, I definitely think a huge showpiece World Cup in the US, Mexico, and Canada is a draw to some of these names for sure.
Yeah, I think. When I think of the World Cup in the US and how a manager might enjoy that, I always think of Jack Charlton absolutely losing his rag in like 110 degree heat on the touchline when Ireland are trying to make a substitution. But I think there is something in that for sure. It's a very attractive thing to be part of. But I guess going back to the guts of Michael's question, when he talks about Thomas Tuchel and Julian Nagelsmann, of course there's an age gap between them, but Thomas Tuchel we still think is a relatively young, or at least in the prime of his career sort of coach. Nagelsmann's a little bit different, both in terms of career path and actual age, of course. But the sense that these are two guys who could quite easily and are still linked with top club jobs, choosing to go international management. And I think there are a couple of strands to this. Firstly, I think you have to look at their personal situations and their contract situations. So Nagelsmann initially took the Germany job on quite a short deal before liking it and extending it. Tuchel has taken a relatively short deal of 18 months. Not something that the FA revealed, by the way, but that Thomas Tuchel, and as we say, loose lips sink ships in his press conferences, he came out with that, of course, unprompted. That sort of thing, the Sly Stone thing of, newlyweds a year ago, but we're still checking each other out. There's a sense of let's mutually wait and see. But and I think that is an interesting tactic from FAs who have sort of realised that, bar the odd exception in terms of like fortunate timing, like Antonio Conte for Italy, for example, who's between jobs, it is difficult to get the very best coaches into international jobs. So what do? You have to change your approach of recruitment if you want to break through that glass ceiling. And that means understanding that they still have options in the club games, making exceptions in terms of contracts, releases and all that sort of stuff, like realizing that you can't go in and lock someone down on a 3-4 year contract anymore. I think that's really important. But I think the way that has worked is really evident in what's happened with Nagelsmann, for example. So he tried the Germany job for like 7-8 months. And he's like, oh yeah, this is good, actually. Maybe I can take this at this point in my career. Maybe Nagelsmann is someone who's like a line in the sand, really, because the fact that he, at his age, with his options, has decided to like really embrace it. He's like, I had a little try, and he's like, yeah, actually, I can really get into this. And now he's a little bit of the way into it. I will give myself another couple of years. And you know what? There'll still be a career for me afterwards, which in his day, I suppose, Sir Bobby Robson was kind of like a totem for. The fact that he went on to have this really interesting, successful, fascinating coaching career to prove that there is life beyond the England job. But the last thing I would say is that the way that the finances work when you leave a top club job maybe gives you that little bit of freedom to do that as well. Because normally it would be you come to a lump sum settlement if you go back like sort of 5-10 years. But now, normally, when a coach's employment is terminated at a club, they're carried on in terms of getting paid until they find a suitable next job. So on one hand, it makes it like there's no massive imperative for you to find a job immediately because you're still getting paid as if you were doing the job. On the other hand, it can persuade you to stay out the game maybe a little bit longer than you should, because like if you're like I think less than a year out of the game as a coach, people are like, oh, he's great. Why doesn't someone get him? He's such a great coach, and they forget all the bad things about you. But if you're more than a year out of the game, and Pochettino's been in this situation, as Lars was saying before, people are like, well, what's wrong with him? And I think it's quite interesting that all the last 3 coaches that have been got rid of by Bayern have gone straight into international management, right?
Is it pragmatism then, Lars, rather than cool, as Michael on Instagram is saying? Because the likes of Roberto Martinez has made an industry of becoming a national coaches, across Europe now. And Zinedine Zidane has been waiting in the wings, it seems, for France forever.
Again, in no rush.
Yeah, no rush at all.
Other than the one that he really wants.
Pep Guardiola was linked to the England job. I wonder if it's not so much cool to take on a national team coaching job, as Michael on Instagram is asking, but it's just pragmatic.
It can be both. Like, I mean, if it's not cool, then doing it would not be a pragmatic choice. Like, if, there's a logic to it. And I think you can definitely go through the personal circumstances, like Andy said. And I think there can be situations where we always say the big drawback with international football is that you don't get the day-to-day coaching. But there can be coaches who maybe could do with some time without the intensity of that anyway. And I think one thing that's maybe not spoken enough about with Nagelsmann is how bruising it must have been for him personally that the Bayern job didn't go the way he was hoping it would. He's a guy, he's born in Bavaria. He grew up a Bayern fan. For him, coaching Bayern Munich is like the top job he could get on the planet. That there's no bigger thing for him. And he ends up getting landed with that chance, that responsibility, that opportunities in his mid-30s, which is way too soon, probably. And it goes wrong. Like, imagine getting like the job that you grow up dreaming of once having in your mid-30s, and it goes terribly wrong. Like, we can't. I don't think he's spoken publicly about it, but that must be a huge psychological blow for him. So for him, instead of throwing himself into another like high pressure, the media's at you every single day, you have to deal with all that. For him, taking a national team job, where a lot of the time you just kind of go to games and see how the players are doing. And then you still get the feeling, the juice of the intensity of it, but you get it in short spurts while you kind of maybe find your way again as a person, really. I think that was really good for him. And there can be similar circumstances. Like I've already mentioned managers who get to the tail end of their careers, but also Tuchel. Like he's had a couple of rough experiences at club level. He also had a bad time at Bayern. He had the wild scenes at Chelsea when they became a frozen asset. Before that, he was at PSG before that. Maybe the guy, again, a period of like slightly less intense living of his job is not a bad thing for him on a mental side of things. So it can both be a little bit extra cool this cycle. I would maintain that I think the US and Mexico, Canada, like the glamour of that holds a little bit more extra appeal to coaches than other World Cup destinations would have. But it can also be like maybe they're acknowledging that actually coaching a national team job can be a good, like, you can have a sabbatical without having a proper sabbatical, if that makes sense.
This question from Jerry on email. As Spain are currently dominating European international football, is there any possibility that they won't be the favourites for the 2026 World Cup?
I think this is a question that you've got to divide up into two parts, really. Because to say they're currently dominating European international football, well, they've just won the Euros, which, of course, is a great achievement. But is that a period of sustained dominance, or is that them just winning one tournament? Because it's just them winning one tournament. A tournament that they were not expected to win, even inside Spain. And I know hindsight is a wonderful thing. Not saying that they didn't deserve to win the tournament. Of course, they did deserve to win the tournament. But I think the main thing that's led people to say, okay, this could be the start of a dynasty, is not actually the evidence of what they're seeing from the Spain team, even though they played very attractive, very effective football, but more the evidence of the other countries and where they are at the moment. And that goes to the second part of the question. Is there any possibility that they won't be the favourites for the 2026 World Cup? Because I think we look around at the moment and we see Brazil aren't in great shape. France, we've seen in this international break of no real leadership. If France go on under Didier Deschamps, they're not winning the World Cup in 2026. It's just not happening. Now, you shouldn't be able to say that with the squad that they've got, but if they continue on their current trajectory, they will not win the World Cup in 2026. And then you think Portugal have got the whole Cristiano Ronaldo psychodrama that stops them being quite what they should be as well.
When does that end? Sorry to interject, but how old does he have to be before we don't have to do this anymore? We're 10 years from now. He's still putting shirtless pics on Instagram of him looking great, saying, I'm still in shape, I can still do it, I'm still here.
It's a fair question. My favourite statistic of the week is after he scored against Poland at the end of last week, Cristiano Ronaldo. He has 133 international goals, which is the same as Pauletta, Figo, Eusebio and Matitao put together. I mean, that's ridiculous. And if you want to underline of course, it's an amazing achievement, but if you want to underline the longevity, I mean, I was there the night in Belfast that he broke the scoring record, Eusebio's scoring record. And that was seen as almost a bigger deal than breaking Pauletta's one, which was a little bit higher, which obviously he went on to do a couple of months later. But it felt epochal, and now he's got as many goals as all these guys put together. Is absolutely remarkable. But as Lars says, I don't think it puts Portugal in a brilliant position to be a winner of the World Cup. So is there that sense, do you think, Lars, of almost not that this Spain team have really the quality to necessarily dominate for years and years to come? To me, they don't look like a 2008 Spain or a 2010 Spain or a 2012 Spain, but just really there's a sense of, if we can just not drop the ball in this little period, maybe we could cash in.
Yeah, I think the question is, will they be favourites? I mean, the favourite with the bookmakers always seems to be England for reasons that are very, I think, to do with how gambling works more than anything, because a lot of people put money on England for reasons that are their own, I guess. In terms of who will be actual favourites, I don't know. I think one thing we haven't mentioned here in the Spain equation is how good is Lamine Yamal going to be 18 months from now? Because if he continues on with his current trajectory, it's not impossible that Spain go into that tournament with the best player in the world.
He'll be able to vote. He'll be able to vote in 2 years' time.
Yeah, well, excitingly. Now, he's already one of the most impactful players in world football. A little bit more experience and, fingers crossed, no injuries. He could be the guy. Since Mbappe, to my mind, seems to be losing his way a little bit. That's not implausible. So if you take the very impressive collective that we had at the Euros, that incredibly good midfield, and the defense that held up much better than I think anyone expected them to, and you add Lamine Yamal, who was already brilliant but will be even better and might have taken that step into absolute megastardom, then I don't think it's unreasonable to say they could be favourites again.
I guess that's the other question, isn't it? If we're talking about players who are developing, Gavi wasn't available to them at the Euros, and you look at what Samu's doing at Porto, but by the 2026 World Cup, he could be one of the better strikers in the Premier League, couldn't he? Yeah. And replace Alvaro Morata. Who knows?
Unbeaten in 19. Spain haven't been beaten since March 2023, and And the Spanish coach, De La Fuente, has only lost twice as Spain manager since his
I just got completely distracted thinking about how good Spain could be, because Rodri is still going to be like the Busquets guy who's like, he'll be fine by then. He'll be back from his ACL. That's all going to be fine. A fit Gavi and Pedri, either side of him, and Yamal on one flank, and a sort of second coming of Didier Drogba type Samu up front, sort of bashing everyone aside and causing trouble. And then either one out of like Dani Olmo or Williams or something on the other flank. I mean, this will be a very scary football team if everyone stays fit and develop the way they should.
This question from Louis on Instagram. I saw that Yohan Cabaye has been promoted to sporting director at PSG's youth academy. With that, can we expect to see a doubling down on the club's youth-focused approach?
Well, it's something they've needed for a while because, as we know, Paris is an incredible global producer of football talent.
They're always talking about it, but do they mean it?
Well, I guess they've got really the opportunity to do it now, haven't they? Because they've moved on from that superstar model because there's no Mbappe, there's no Neymar, there's no Messi, and they all disappeared within the space of a year. There's that sense of there being a pathway. But of course, the perception and the reality are two different things. We know that for a while, and it was decreed by Mbappe, wasn't it, that PSG need to move to this more Parisian youth-led model. For the moment, they are still going to go out and, try and purchase instant success. That is the way they've gone. But the way that Qatar has changed the way it's looking at football over the last couple of years, I think is notable. I think if you look at the purchase of the shareholding in Braga, that is based around not necessarily yet a multi-club network, but really sort of exchanging coaching ideas, exchanging youth development. If you look at football in Qatar, while Saudi Arabia has been going out and buying big stars, give or take Marco Verratti, Qatari football now wants to develop its own and has done for a couple of years. So it's something that the owners are thinking about and not just built around the resources of Paris and the Parisian region, which they always should have been leaning on. Now, in terms of Cabaye being like someone who's answerable for the academy, I think that's really important because, he's someone who's already been involved in youth coordination at the club. He understands how the club works, how important youth production is. But to have a recognisable figure who has it as his bottom line is really important because you're talking about youth production really on an industrial level. But in the past, there've been controversies with how the players have been treated, how they've been developed. Has there been a pathway for them to get into the first team, which is obviously less important than how they're treated on a daily basis? But, you look at someone like Christopher Nkunku, who was asked on this international break, could you see yourself going back to PSG at some point? He was quite coy about it. He was saying yes, even though his mouth wasn't necessarily saying yes. But, someone like him who, if you look at, if Nkunku had emerged now at PSG rather than when he did, he'd be straight in the first team. I don't have any doubt about that. But because of the sporting politic of the club at the time, Nkunku could come in, play games, and bear in mind at this point you had to be really good to get unimaginably good to get anywhere near the PSG first team as a youth product. He would play like he belonged there, and he still knew that long term he was never going to get a game. Whereas I don't think that's so much the case anymore. So how Cabaye is going to be in this job, we don't really know yet. I would imagine pretty good, but we don't really know yet because he's not had the job before or an equivalent job before. What we can know is now, as well as there being an intention and a pathway, there's accountability as well, which is super important.
Question from Chris on Instagram. After Lazio and Atletico Madrid were fined just £37,000 and £25,000 respectively for racist behaviour from their fans, is this evidence that football associations aren't taking racism in football seriously, Lars?
Yeah, without getting into the specific of those two cases, it is eternally frustrating that football is an industry that says it has zero tolerance for racism, but time and time again we get the sense from the actual consequences of these incidents that they have quite a lot of tolerance for. There is not zero tolerance, there is some tolerance for racism, clearly, because they're not really prepared to put any weight behind it in terms of sanctions. And listen, collective punishment of fans is a controversial issue. I get that, and I get that that can be deeply unfair to the fans who've done nothing wrong. But I also just think on a very basic sort of human level, the footballers, they are entitled to be able to go to their place of work and act and do their job without being racially abused. That is something you have to be able to expect. And if clubs cannot provide them with the setting in which to do that job without being racially abused in some way, there has to be very serious consequences. And I think closing stands, I think banning crowds from games is an entirely rational place to go, because if you're not able to have fans in without someone racially abusing the players on the pitch, then you shouldn't be allowed to have fans in for a while. I think that makes sense. Now, that is deeply unfair to the thousands of fans who did not do anything wrong. But perhaps if we have an actual zero tolerance towards this, an element of self-policing will start to emerge, and people will understand that there are consequences and stakes to this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's it, because I think the top line of the fines is a little bit misleading, really, because most clubs are so rich. I mean, what fine could you really make to inconvenience them? I think as well, there is a greater fiscal loss, which, as Lars says, is the closing of the stands, which is going to make a massive difference. Now, something that I thought felt like a sort of a really real turning point to me is in the Madrid derby recently. Now, this wasn't specifically actually to do with racist behaviour, although Atletico Madrid fans, or a section of Atletico Madrid fans, the Frente Atletico have been strongly involved in that in the past, particularly towards Vinicius, as we know. But when the match was delayed, when stuff was thrown at Thibaut Courtois after Eder Militao opened the scoring, the Frente Atletico were mainly involved in that. And I think you look at both Atletico and Lazio, and the clubs have not shown. We can talk about the associations. The club have to show a real will to crack down on this sort of behaviour, rather than just go, "Oh, it's just some fans," and that doesn't stand for most fans, because that might be true, but by implication, that just minimises the seriousness of it. So I think the language that clubs use to deal with this sort of thing is really important, and they need to be better at that. And actually, these two clubs in particular definitely need to be better at that. Now, the thing that I thought was the turning point is at the end, when Atletico scored their last-minute equaliser and the players went to applaud the fans, the bit where the players went to applaud the ultras from the Frente Atletico, they were booed by the rest of the stadium. The players were booed for throwing a bone to those fans. And it felt like, and Lars talked about self-policing, the majority of the fans saying, right, this is enough. You can't behave like this on behalf of our club. Now, you could argue maybe they should have done that for previous incidents in the past. Like, put that to one side for a minute. That's what really changes things. And collective punishment is not fair. It's also not fair to be racially abused while you're doing your job. As Lars says, that is the starting point of any sort of decent, functioning football culture. So really, I think we as fans, we've seen in the past that the football authorities often, and the clubs, can often not make good on what is the right thing and what should happen in our game. But when we, the fans, decide something needs changing, we can actually make a difference, I think. And I'm sorry if that sounds a bit trite, but I think there's a lot of truth in it.
No, not trite at all. In fact, this next question is perhaps apt following on from that conversation, because Giuseppe on YouTube says, with Mario Balotelli, and remember what he went through, certainly in the early part of his career in terms of racism, with Mario Balotelli reported to be joining Genoa, how do you think he'll fare? And will he rekindle the, and I love this phrase, the magical chaos that only he can provide? Lars?
I mean, it's a bit of a Hail Mary thing, isn't it? He has scored some goals in Turkey when he's been out there. He's not been entirely unproductive in the last few years. But the thing about it is, like, Genoa, the context here is that Genoa are owned by 777 partners, who anyone who's followed the sort of the drama of their attempt to buy Everton will know are not the best ownership group around, and the group appears to be collapsing for a number of reasons that we don't really have the time to get into here, but like their ownership is in huge trouble. The club is 18th in Serie A at the moment, so you have not had a good start to the season. The ownership is a total mess. Might as well bring in Balotelli. Who knows what could happen? Let's just kind of throw a hand grenade into this and like, maybe it'll work. I don't know. It could also be, I mean, yeah, I think we'd all like to see Balotelli be happy and productive somewhere. I'm not sure this is a good idea, but then currently things are not well at Genoa, so you might as well try it.
That's the thing. Your options are limited when the transfer window is shut and your owners are on their uppers. I think you look at not just Genoa, but there are a lot of other clubs that 777 have got a stake in, or a major stake in, that face a really uncertain future. And it's really worrying, of course. You know, we saw British basketball come really close to collapsing for the same reasons. So it's not just football. You know, it's had a massive effect on sport. But Balotelli, we'll have to see if he actually does come with Alberto Gilardino, a really, really great Italian centre-forward in his time, of course. Him being under pressure at the moment because of where they are in the league. We don't know if the club are actually going to sign off on Balotelli. But there is a feeling they need something. And as Lars says, I think it is a Hail Mary. But you look, they've not only got 5 points out of the first 7 games, they've scored 5 goals in the first 7 games. And you look at Matteo Retegui having the start of season of his life, playing brilliantly for Atalanta, doing great for the Italian national team as well. A club of Genoa's current means cannot afford to replace that. You know, the money just goes in that financial black hole, and that's that. Look, Balotelli would be a punt. I know there will be people looking at this saying, oh yeah, but I've seen him on Instagram recently doing that training on his own and he looks really fit. And it's kind of like Sergio Ramos, like, you know, dragging tyres up his sort of hill drive, isn't it? It's just a bit, yeah, really? But that in an actual football situation, I mean, he's had no pre-season of meaning. Even if they get him in, how long does it take him to get himself into any sort of nick? Look, I love Balotelli. I would love it to work. Would it work? I don't know.
Magical chaos.
What I can envisage, if you kind of close your eyes and you think maybe...
Okay, I'm doing it.
With the ownership being what it is, probably going under, the team... It's not impossible that they go down. It's a pretty good chance that they go down. So next season...
When you've asked someone to close their eyes, normally you provide more calming words. I'm having a panic attack here.
Well, imagine, I mean, the city of Genoa is a very beautiful place. It's right there on the coast. They play in a lovely stadium, one of the classic stadiums of Italian football. Together with Sampdoria, one of the clubs are always a mess. Sometimes both of them are a mess at the same time, but the stadium's very pretty and the city is very beautiful. If they go down... and the ownership is all gone wrong, they will need to rebuild from just a complete pile of rubble. And Mario Balotelli, you know, one last sort of Indian summer in his career, playing in Serie B, where surely his talent level alone will put him sort of ahead of some of the people around. Can we imagine Mario Balotelli scoring like 20 goals in Serie B next season, leading a rebuilding Genoa back to the promised land of being a sort of slightly underwhelming mid-table club in Serie A? Yes, I can see that happening. I can imagine that. So maybe he's there a little bit too early. He needs to... Oh, he can take the rest of the season as an extended pre-season for leading them back to glory next year. I can see that happening.
I should have trusted him. I do feel calm now.
Great food in Genoa as well.
Thank you for listening to the magical chaos of Ask OTC. If you would like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at Radio Dotun at Andy Brassel, at Lars Sivertsen, or at OTC Pod. And you can email us, otc@footballramble.com.